Dr. Jack Rasmus is a political science and economics professor at St. Mary's College. He's written a book on the issue of what's going on with our finances and the super committee and the economy. And we were going to have a report from Steve Handelsman on all of the happenings today in Washington, D.C., but we're having some technical difficulties with that. So Dr. Rasmus will help me sort through all of that. So what happened today? The super committee, they didn't even come out and talk to the media. They just issued a statement saying we can't come to an agreement, and so we're not going to have one.
Right, right. That means that the $1.2 trillion that was agreed to back in August will automatically come into effect now. Actually, it's not implemented until January 2013. It's just that now that's the option that's going to be introduced. That's about a half, $600 billion in defense cuts, and the rest in non-exempt.
So that was kind of already predetermined, right?
Yeah, that was determined August 2nd as part of the deal.
But hopefully this committee was going to come up with a different 1.2 and perhaps even more, but they couldn't come to an agreement.
They were mandated to come up with, if they could, at least 1.5 trillion more. And it could have been a different mix, not half defense, half something else. Or they could have come up with $4 trillion. Some were talking as much as $3 or $4 trillion. The grand deal that they were talking about last summer. But that doesn't look very likely. That's the least possible scenario.
So they came out today, they said we can't come to an agreement. But isn't the official deadline Wednesday? So is it possible that in the next 24 hours or so something could change? Or do you really think that this is just not going to happen?
Well, it's quite different than August 2nd, because then you had the whole question of the debt ceiling and the default of the government. Now we don't have that. So what is really the firm deadline date is an interesting question. It certainly isn't today. And it may not even be Wednesday. They have quite a bit of time to continue negotiating on this. And actually,
why was this day selected? Was it an arbitrary day?
Well, I think,
or was there some significance about having a decision today?
Well, I think it was really selected because Congress will leave on December 23rd, and they figured 30 days to give them to work it through the committees and so forth. So, you know, the idea was give them at least a month. I don't think there was anything really particular about November 23rd that was critical.
Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of was not surprised. I mean, I remember when they came up with the idea of the super committee and they're going to send us, and automatically I remember sitting at my desk going, that's never going to happen. And so I don't know, maybe there are people who had more faith in the system, but I think a lot of voters are now very frustrated. Once again, the lawmakers could not come to any kind of a compromise. They couldn't come up with an agreement, and many people say once again they're putting their own party politics ahead of the dire needs of the country. Do you agree or disagree, or what do you think about that, the whole thing?
Well, certainly there's politics involved here. This is an election year, and they're politicians, right? So obviously they're thinking about their situations as far as elections concerned. But there are some fundamental issues here behind the two parties. It's not just politicians bickering. On the Republican side, it's the question of the Bush tax cuts. They don't want to touch those tax cuts. They probably felt that it's better to bring the issue of extending the Bush tax cuts up for a vote right during the election period next October. They'd have a better chance of getting those extended. On the Democrat side, it's a question of their political base and not cutting Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, which really aren't the source of the problem here of the deficit. There's a lot of misunderstanding as to whether Social Security and Medicare are a cause of the deficits.
But you bring up an interesting point. Both parties seem to have something to gain by not coming up with a solution now. The automatic cuts come into play, as you mentioned, but they don't really come into play until January of next year. We have an election in November of next year. The election would happen first. So it seems like they are better poised if they don't make a decision. We have the automatic cuts, we leave it lay and deal with the election first and then come out and solve it. Would that be accurate?
True, but in fact the sequestration, which means automatic cuts, does not really occur until January 15th. So there's a lot of dates here, and the question is what's the really fundamental date? And they know, the politicians know that there are multiple dates and that this is really the beginning of the debate, not really the end of it. The public thought this was going to be the end, we're going to wrap it up. But it's really, think of it really as the beginning of the process, because in December there are 4 major items that have to come up for a vote and legislation and passage. And you're going to see some of this super committee issues get rolled in, I believe, into some of these other items.
So now, you know, as you look at what's happening with the politics of it all, and understanding that, we still have the fundamental question of what does this do to our country and our economy? We're seeing what's happening in Europe. We remember the debt crisis that we had a few months ago. Does this really hurt the markets? We saw things kind of plunge at 250 points today. I don't know how much of that correlated directly with this decision coming out. But does this really hurt and impact our economy while we play these political games?
Well, it's certainly not going to affect the rating of the government.
Right. So it's a little different this time.
Yes, quite a bit different in that regard. I think the markets have kind of factored in this may not have happened, and I don't see any real downgrades or anything happening unless they come back and try to take away some of the 1.2 trillion automatic cuts, which may happen. Senator McCain, I understand, has introduced a bill to strip out the $600 billion of the defense cuts. I don't think that's going to pass, but nonetheless.
But all of that type of thing is now going to come up.
Exactly. There's going to be a lot of maneuvering going on. They have a decision whether by December 31st to extend unemployment insurance. That's $50 billion. Extend the payroll tax cut. That's another $112 billion. The alternative minimum tax. That's $70 billion, and then you have the doctor's fix, as they call it, reducing fees by 29%.
Meanwhile, the voters become more and more outraged. Dr. Rasmus, we want to thank you for coming by. Lots more to talk about, but all we can do tonight. So we appreciate you coming down and shedding a little bit of light on it. And we'll see what happens, as you mentioned, in the next month or two, and really maybe even the next year. There could be a lot more debate on the issue.
I'm sure there will be.